Good morning. This is Tim Selden, president of the Montessori Foundation, and this is our weekly series of webinars for Montessori school leaders. This week, we were expecting to be joined by Liesl Lang. I know she's trying to log on. Something is going wrong from her end, and she's not with us yet. Hopefully, she will be able to join us soon. I am going to unmute her just in case. Liesl, by any chance, are you online? No. Liesl?
Oh, there you are, Tim.
I had to unmute you. I didn't realize what had happened.
You just unmuted me.
Well, good.
Okay,
I'm so glad
we're in business now.
we're in business now. All right, so folks, this week our topic is continuing with the topic of creating a sense of community and engagement with parents. Liesl Lang was with us a few weeks ago. I want to remind you that Liesl is the publisher of SRQ Media Group here in Sarasota, Florida. She is a writer, a specialist in communication among organizations. She has a new organization that was founded this last year called Springboard that works to help nonprofits and for-profits develop stronger relationships with their customers and with their internal community. And she is helping the Newgate School, among other things, and her help is very much appreciated. A number of you asked if Liesl could come back and be with us and chat with us about newsletters, Facebook, email, and other ways one can use social media to create engagement. And Liesl, let me turn it over to you. I'll kibitz an aside, but I know you have a lot to share.
Sure. Thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for joining us tomorrow. So sorry about the technical issues, but we're on the roll right now. So, Tim, it's an ongoing process. How to communicate, and even more importantly than how to communicate is how to engage. And when I'm working with organizations, I always start, before we dig into the sort of nitty-gritty of the different mediums we can all utilize to communicate. I always start with two very important assumptions. And the first one is that communications is the bridge. And if you could see me now, I've got my hands, up sort of over my head with one hand reaching the other as a bridge. And I think sometimes we forget that communication isn't just one-sided. It is the receipt and the understanding of communication. If it's not heard, then it really hasn't been communicated. And I think sometimes we get into a pathway where we've got so many things we're doing. We're sending out the communications. We're doing it. It's a checklist, and we're checking things off. But we're not necessarily taking the time to think about whether or not it's effective, whether or not it's been heard. So a lot of the communications that we're going to be talking about today, it's equally talking about what can we do and what might we want to do in terms of newsletters or social media, and Tomorrow's Child, and so many great mediums. But then the other question, which is really the second assumption, which is what is it that our audience wants, and how do they want it? Because there's an old saying that I learned way back when in journalism school. Communication. Do we print the news that people need, or do we print the news that they want? And in today's world, with the proliferation of communication channels and media, what consumers want plays very high on the priority list. Even if there's something we feel, wow, they would really benefit from this, and it'd be great if they could, join us at the seminar or hear this piece of news about what's happening at the school. But ultimately, if they're not carving out the time for it, if there's not a sense of desire or want or convenience in being able to access that information from their side, then the communication doesn't have the full bandwidth to be able to resonate with. So again, that's, it's putting yourself in your audience's mind and figuring out what you think will help them, because ultimately they're going to drive the success of your communication. You're really responding to their needs. You're responding to the mediums that they most want to see the communications come across. When we talk about frequency, how often should we post a newsletter? How often should we blog? How often should we have something on Facebook or use Facebook at all? These are all questions that when we're answering it, we want to put the eyeglasses on, sort of, and put the mindset of our audience, our parents, our community, and we want to ask ourselves, what is it that they would like to hear, and how would they like to hear it? And that's really the most important question. I think sometimes we get wrapped up in the communication cycle, which is we're doing all sorts of things, we're sending things out, we're writing things, and we think they're incredible, and why isn't anyone reading it, and why why does it not have the the impact that we're looking for? And sometimes it's just taking a breather, to stop and to really ask, how is it, I'm missing the mark here. And it's not necessarily just a matter of doing more communications. It's not, I've got to do more newsletters, I've got to blog more, I've got to, have this whole sort of like, this proliferation of frequency or media. It's not necessarily more. It's what are we communicating, and how are we communicating it, and is that how our audience wants to receive that? So I think those are two basic assumptions, is that communication isn't communication unless it's heard, unless it's been consumed. And then number two is our consumer, or our school, our parents, our different audiences. Those are our consumers, and we need to be thinking about how they want to be communicated with. There's so much noise out there, always so much noise, but even more so today, so much noise in terms of communication, where you can get information. We need to make whatever we're doing stand out. We need it to be meaningful, and more importantly than anything else, we want to have it come in the way that it's convenient for them, and that they'll be able to open up and say, okay, great, this is easy. So a couple of things, if we're not doing, that could be great, is during the orientation, or even in the enrollment, or slightly after the enrollment process, when you have a family that has re-enrolled or it's coming on board, it is a great point at that time to ask for their communications preferences. And I would suggest, instead of asking, fill in the blank, write how you'd like to be communicated with, because you get all sorts of things, to give them a list of the ways that the school currently communicates. We have a quarterly print newsletter, we have an online blog, we have a Facebook and a Twitter page, and putting those down and asking for your parent families to identify which one of those communication vehicles are going to be the most successful for them, which ones they're already tagged into, they're already engaged in. That's going to be lessen the sort of the challenge of getting through to them. And then midway through the year, or perhaps maybe toward the re-enrollment cycle, that midway through the year, to send out a survey to your parents to have them rate or comment on the communications. Taking some time to do that and getting their feedback is truly important, because it's not so much that it is, well, we really don't connect with the content. That might be the case, but most of the time, when there's a communication blip and we're sending the communication but it's not really being received, most of the time it's because of the vehicle, and not necessarily because of the content. And we'll get into content at a later point, but really choosing the right vehicle for the right type of communication is the number one reason why communications don't work well. It's why they underperform, is because we've either chosen a piece of content to go through a medium that's really not well suited for it, or we're utilizing a medium that is great for the school or great for the organization, but it's not one that the parents are subscribed to. So making sure there's not that disconnect, starting there. And then, as we move into it, there are three really main areas of communication, and Tim has shared some of the areas that I know you're most interested in hearing about, so I've kind of prioritized that. The first type is the bricks and mortars, what I call, the traditional, conventional media or communications, and that starts with the identity. It starts with your corporate brand, and all of the peripheral materials, the collaterals, the brochures, the folder, the letterhead. That is, sort of your base way to communicate your identity and brand. The second type of bricks and mortar, you wouldn't have said this, decades ago, but is website. Absolutely, your website. And the third is, the printed newsletters. Whether or not you do them monthly, quarterly, biannually, some form of a printed newsletter is sort of in that same role of bricks and mortar traditional, conventional. So here are a couple of things that are happening with, in particular, website and in printed newsletter. I mean, I can remember a time where, you worked with a web developer and they said, well, how many pages do you need? 3 to 5? Do you need 5 to 7 pages? And oh my, that has completely changed today. I mean, our website has become our new platform for everything. It's where we launch a lot of, where we house all of the information, the forms, the materials, the event flyers, our calendars. It's really the beast. So that's become a completely different animal, and in terms of parsing information. And then I think much more so, there's a complexity of information that you want to share on those websites. So understanding how we're going to parse that is important. Newsletters, and we'll come back to a little more on the websites, newsletters really have taken two different directions. And the first direction is they've become a little bit more like magazines, and that's direction one. And direction two is that they've actually migrated into more of a blog scenario. So in the newsletters, it traditionally it's sort of this mixed bag. We're writing some articles, there may be a letter from the head of school, there's a little bit of information on what's happening programmatically, certainly events has been tried and true content for a printed newsletter, and it's really been very organization centric. Newsletters came about as a way for organization to share what's happening with us, what are we doing, what do we need you to do, and keeping everybody in the loop. Well, newsletters have had to step up to the plate and become much more consumer publications than organizational publications. So instead of it being purely a way to get information out, the question has been, Matt, well, how do we adopt more of a consumer magazine approach where you've got these articles that are very compelling and aren't just what we're trying to put together and say, but it's really an article that's been crafted for the reader, that they're going to take that time out of their day to pick up something printed and really spend time with it. And the other thing is newsletters. There's certain things that don't work well in newsletters necessarily today. And I still see organizations that put, columns and columns of events. This is all the stuff that's happening. Well, the reality is events are not being consumed that way. They're not really being promoted that way. Some of the social media avenues and certainly the website and even blogs are much more effective way to craft and to promote events coming up than putting them into a printed piece, which is digested at some point, but then probably put aside for the upcoming days or weeks. So the events really have migrated very much so out of the newsletter world into and then and the digital postcards, evites, all of those. I mean, those have been much more effective ways to promote events. 30 days out you're sending something, 15 days out you're sending something. So again, newsletters, when it comes to events, it's a great it's a great place to really flesh out a big event that's coming up, because typically big events, your annual events, the ones that you have 3 or 4 maybe a year that are really your big ones. One may be a fundraiser, one may be more of a conference, a parent conference, or get together. You may have annual events that are student driven, performances and talent shows and whatnot. Really getting behind the scenes, not just here's the event and here's this is what's coming up, but this is what's happened over the last 3 months as our students and our faculty and volunteers have been working to put this event together. This is, behind the scenes on the programming, behind the scenes on what you're going to experience when you come to that event, and really why it has meaning. Newsletters now have to function more in that magazine mindset, which is something's got to be meaningful. The article's got to tell you much more than the who, what, when, where, why. The who, what, when, where, whys have become digital criteria. They really have left that, that newsletter and that magazine world. And magazines have to really craft stories that are compelling and give you a lot more than the who, what, when, where, why. When you're
Liesl,
thinking about, yeah.
no, finish your thought. Then I want to jump in with something.
No. I was wrapping that up, but just much more so thinking about the content you put in a newsletter functioning more as a magazine article. It has a different feel to it. You're interviewing some people that your families or community may not have spoke to about that topic. You're really bringing more of that sort of media mindset instead of really covering this is an event that's happening. Here's a list of the performers. Here's a list of the volunteers who are helping. I mean, that's all great, but it's got to do so much more.
Right. So one of the things that's going on is that education as a whole is a much more adversarial and contentious place than it was 20, 30 years ago. I mean, we had some schools that had a lot of drugs, a lot of crime. There were disparities in income between one school district and another. But today, the schools are the battleground. I don't know how many of you all listened to NPR. Last night on All Things Considered, they had the story, Where Have All the Teachers Gone? And if you haven't read it, I really encourage you to go to npr.com.org and look it up and listen to it. You can also read it. Very, very interesting about the changes in education and why so many teachers are not going into it, where people who would have become teachers are not going into the profession. But from the point of view of parents, parents are being told all kinds of things by all kinds of people. And they're reading in the newspapers, they're seeing on TV, they're hearing on on radio, people are talking to them, their friends or coworkers, messages that basically suggest that you should be very, very afraid, that your kid has to meet the Common Core, that, if your kids don't pass certain exams, they're doomed for life. It's just, teachers are really unhappy about this. From the point of view of schools, many of us are facing the question of engagement. I mentioned this contentiousness, which I think many of our listeners will agree with, that parents often have an almost ambivalent relationship in many cases with our schools, partially because many of us are running independent, tuition-based schools, but also because we're all different, even the charter and public Montessori schools. And these days, parents are afraid of being different. Now, one of my questions that leads to what you've been saying is, the real topic is, how do we get parents to pay attention? How do we get parents to engage? How do we get parents to feel more connected with our school? And I'm recognizing that around them, there's a whole world that's basically trying to pull them away from us, not so much because the world doesn't like us, but because the world is sort of tearing itself apart when it comes to schools. Parents are really feeling a little nuts. How do we create engagement, and how important is it to not only provide compelling stories and medias that are or mediums that are comfortable for parents to access, like maybe Facebook or online or whatever, but getting parents to participate in a conversation? To what extent is that important, and do parents even have the time to engage in conversation?
That's a great question, Tim, and I'm glad you bring up sort of the context of the relationship and the fear that's there, because certainly those are things that are rampant out there right now. And if we just kind of look blindly around there, the world is full of things that be concerning to a parent. In terms of engagement, I would say there are two things. And the first one is, you can, at the orientation, at the enrollment, at that first sort of impression, you can always provide that openness, and we welcome having conversation. You really, it's a door opener, but that really isn't the point at which they have that aha moment. Every parent at some point in their child's education, usually earlier than later, is going to have that moment of, oh my gosh, and it's going to be something that they realize they're worried about. It's going to be something that maybe happened in the classroom that they're about from their child and they're concerned about. Every parent goes through something where, okay, everything's okay, and I'm busy, the school seems to be doing well, and everything seems to be going well, but at some point they reach a crossroads. And sometimes it just could be something that they heard from a friend that all of a sudden they're worried. Oh my gosh, is my child going to be okay and doing that type of work that they need to or whatnot. That is it's a pivotal point, because how the school reacts at that very juncture immediately and thoroughly and meaningfully will absolutely set the tone for the engagement for the rest of their engagement cycle with the school.
No, so the rest of all the years they're there, or whether they actually return.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and yes, if it's handled really poorly, then you have a parent who says, I'm not really sure this is the place for us. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more of the gray area, of what happens. I think that parents want, when that situation kind of occurs, the school needs to be prepared to be transparent, to come right to it and say, let's have a conversation about it. Let's get down into it. But not only that, but you can preempt some of these conversations or encourage. The worst thing that happens is when the parent has this crossroads moment and they don't share it with the school. It's something that they've thought of, they're talking to their group of friends, and they don't bring it up, so it never gets addressed, and all of a sudden you see them not engaged and not coming out, and at some point maybe they decide to move to a new school and you're not really sure what happened. And you could say, well, if they only had been more engaged. Well, engagement is a gift that a parent gives to the school, and it's interesting to look at it from both ways, because schools want engagement and parents are very they want it conceptually, but very few have time to just say, oh yeah, sure, I'll be available. When do you need me? Sign me up for this, that, and the other. There's sort of that time period of where they're dating, and it's, well, what am I going to be asked to do? Do I have the time for it, etc. And then this crossroads moment typically happens. Schools can be very proactive about talking about areas parents are worried about. In other words, we most of the time think, well, we're going to shout out all of our strengths. We're going to really promote our strengths, talk about how great we are, our qualifications, all of the positives. But what we may not be thinking about is we also want to talk about those things that worry parents, that are concerns, that we know people are talking about, and instead of just glossing over it, you may start a blog that's parenting from the Montessori view. Looking at challenges of traditional education as it relates to Montessori, or even just point blank, a place for them to come to hear about some of the things that they may have concerns about. And if you were to do it, let's say in a blog scenario, or let's say you were to do it as a every quarter we're going to pick a topic that we think our parents are concerned about, and we're going to bring in a speaker, and we're going to have our school participate, and we're going to have a seminar or a series where we can kind of workshop that concern. That's very proactive, and it's letting parents know, okay, I'm not alone in worrying about this. Number one. Number two, the school's aware of this. Three, I can meet other parents who are maybe working through homework and education security, and I'm going to be able to connect with them. And it also lets them know that school's not just there in the good times, but it's also there in the bad times. It's really those points that define us. And I've seen, I've seen parents who have had that crossroads moment and had a concern, and for some reason it didn't connect with the school, and they ended up going someplace else to talk about the issue or the concern. They went someplace else to get expertise on it, and it wasn't the school, and that is a huge missed opportunity, Tim.
Well, that's a really important point. So how do we get these people engaged? What media do they seem to like? Um, for example, we use Montessori Compass at Newgate, and in theory, parents could talk to each other in there, but they have to log in. There's Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Many people use Facebook groups. There's always the fear that some outsider or disgruntled past parent will come in and do a truly slanderous slam of the school.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly happens to every company, and it's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of heads of schools, and I'd like to poll you guys who are listening. How many of you worry about what would happen if you allow your parents to really talk openly with each other? You know, to come together in meetings on your campus where they just have a kind of the ability to talk and not just listen to a presentation from you.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. You know, the feeling of losing control of the conversation is a big concern, and I think that's part of why the communication I'm talking about, the proactive nature there. So, for example, let's say, you know, the last time that we had our you know, our first conversation a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how integral your teacher is. I mean, they're at ground zero. They're the ones who see not only the child, but they see the parents, even if it's for a fleeting couple of minutes in the morning or in the afternoon when they get dropped off or picked up. Your classroom and your teacher, that is where the most critical communication is happening. So, you know, not only just saying, hi, how are things going, but, you know, oh, how are you doing? A lot of times you'll pick up some conversation tidbits. You'll hear, oh, well, you know, I'm really worried about, you know, give a very specific example. You know, I'm really worried that my child who's in primary is not reading fast enough. You know, his cousins are, you know, they know their alphabet forward and backwards. They're reading like crazy. I'm worried that he's not going to be able to catch up. And is he going to be able to read? Is he on pace or whatnot? That's a very prevalent conversation I think that happens in the classroom because there isn't that you know, sort of like that crush on the child to perform in terms of reading. Completely different style in Montessori. So if you know that as a school, and you know that from historically seeing, you know, parents come through your school, it would be great to have a workshop, you know, somewhere in maybe the second year of primary. First year maybe you're still getting introduced, but second year, definitely third year of primary, to have a workshop that talks to that. You know, is my child, and you can even title it, is my child going to be able to read in time? You know, or when are they going to be able to read? You know, and that's the title, and you're really then you're talking parent talk. You know, you're speaking their language because this is what they're concerned about, and they're talking about it, but it's not percolating through the school. And what you want is for the school to be a partner and working with them through that. That's where those relationships get built. Whereas, you know, if they're on their own to try to figure out if it's okay or not, they're reading and they're you know, bringing information, but you're missing an opportunity to engage them on something that they have they're truly concerned about. And parents everywhere, they want the best for their children. They will do anything to, you know, try to make sure that they have the most opportunity. So that's a very deep heartstring when there's a concern of, wow, this is different than maybe I went to a traditional school. It's different, or I'm hearing from cousins or friends or other family members. Well, my child was doing this. And you get into the whole, you know, rat race. But it's a very real concern. For the school to be engaged proactively, saying, you know, this is going to be something that you'll talk about. Let's get together and have a discussion together. Could be a huge difference rather than waiting for, you know, to hear that somebody had that concern, they didn't go to anybody, and then they walked away with the wrong information.
So, from your experience, what about Facebook? Is that something we ought to be mucking around with, or is that bad news for Montessori schools?
Oh, that's an excellent question, and for every opinion, there's a divergent opinion for sure. Facebook is not an engagement platform. that's the first thing that I would say. And I think people think that it is because, well, I'm talking to people, they're chatting, they're thumbing up, they're congrats, etc. There's a lot of chat that's happening, and so therefore that must mean that it leads to engagement. And I think that's the false sense of security there, is that Facebook is indeed a great chat place. It is, here's something that's happening, here's a snap of a photo, ooh, that looks great, we're going to give a shout out to one of our volunteers. I mean, it's a great place for the school to share tidbits of information, some of that behind-the-scenes information to remind everybody about a big event that's coming up and tickets are being sold, etc. But even though people are doing the thumbs up and the likes and oh, way to go, I love it, not a road to engagement, because once they hit that thumbs up, they're done. Once they've written that comment, for the most part, in most Facebook environments, they're done. That was the action. That was what was required, and they're finished with that. It doesn't lead to further discussion. It doesn't lead to further involvement. And I think that's where a lot of organizations misjudge Facebook, and they put a lot of effort into it, thinking that it will cause the engagement, and it's very much so in its own little vacuum. It creates its own little vacuum, and it's great to I don't think you cannot do it. I think you do have to have some level of presence on Facebook, but much more so to share information, not to drive engagement. Engagement is something that happens, I would say, much more so in a blog environment. And whether or not you call it a blog, or you've got content development or online newsletters, those mechanisms are much more able to get a deeper plumb with your parents than a Facebook environment. And it's also a little bit more intimate. I mean, Facebook's a strange animal. It's a dichotomy where at one point it feels very personal, very individual, because you're getting it on your iPhone, your Android, your tablet, you're getting updates, etc. You feel very, connected, right? But at the same time, it's everyone. There's, this global sort of sense of, well, it's just sort of out there, and it's not human necessarily. It doesn't have that flesh and someone I can reach out to that's going to be there for me. It doesn't have that level of responsiveness on a human level that I think is so critical in especially in particular for Montessori, is that human interactivity as really creating the engagement and creating the growth and the learning and the experience and the opportunity. And Facebook is very devoid of those human moments. So I would do it, but if you're looking at Facebook as a way, or even Twitter as a way to engage, I think that you might be looking at the wrong medium. The blogs, and many schools have classroom blogs where you're getting information and getting pictures, and you're seeing what the kids are up to and all that kind of stuff. And that's great. That's really, really important to do, because there's nothing more that a parent, than a parent loves more than to see a photo of their child, engaged and working and in a group and doing things in the classroom, because we don't get to be in that classroom. It's a very special thing to be able to see that. And parents are wild about photos of their kids. So giving them, that's sort of what they want, and going back to that, what they need and what they want. So if you're able to publish classroom blogs that have photos of what the children are working on, short little synopsis of the activity, here's what they're learning, they have this great quote, one of the kids said this really wonderful thing and I want to share it with you. I mean, that is more human, because they're actually getting to see into a special moment in that child's day, and they're also getting to see into the classroom, which for many parents is this mysterious and wonderful place that they can't, they wish they could spend more time in. So blogs are able to do that. Now here's where the integrating a hybrid starts. So this is something that they want. Every parent's going to go onto that classroom blog, look at the photos, feel connected and see what their kid is doing. And then all of a sudden there's a blog posting that might start with that might address a concern. And it's short. You're not going to go into 1,000 words. It's 100 words. It's 75 or whatnot. But it's the teacher reaching out and having heard, wow, this seems to be something my parents are talking about. and and the lack of kindness in the world, or they're concerned about respect and how do we teach our kids that? Well, that's right up Montessori alley. That's exactly what those classrooms are about. So it's an opportunity for the teacher to write a little something, or to work with a group of writers at the school to say, you know what?
Liesl, you there? Hello?
5 other different things and really address it. Yeah. Yes, Tim. Oh, I can't. You might be on mute, Tim. Tim, I'm seeing that you might be on mute. Are you still there? Coming in and out of the conversation.
Hi there, everyone. Can you all hear me?
There you are.
Yes, I got cut off for a moment. My wireless microphone ran out of battery, and it knocked me right off.
Oh no.
Where,
Oh geez.
where
Oh
are
no.
you guys in the conversation, Liesl?
Well, I was just sharing some proactive ways to utilize a blog to share information that parents are talking about that may be concerns, and to sort of utilize the blog as a way to proactively discuss some of those. So I think we're right at that spot with the blog.
That's great. I've got a couple of questions that have come in. Toma Carlson wrote, I believe most parents are truly engaged on an individual basis. However, the problem comes when we rate engagement by the numbers that do or don't show up to a big event or a meeting. We need to understand that meeting we need to understand that meeting parents where they are on an individual basis is also parent engagement. This is hard because we like large numbers at events, which usually doesn't happen anymore in this busy world. There you go. Liesl,
Yeah, I mean, great.
as a parent, what do you think about that?
Oh, I mean, a spot on. You can have a wonderful relation. I mean, I guess showing up is not necessarily the only or the most powerful indicator that you have a parent who is joined at the hip with the school. You know, that they've got their heart there. They've had that experience. They're there, and they're willing to be engaged. And you're absolutely right. Just being in the room does not necessarily mean engagement. You may have a lot of parents who are not able to come to a certain event, or they're not able to come to meetings, but you know the moment you reach out, they're there. They get it. And not only that, but they're sharing the good news with all of their communities, and their circles of influence. So I think that's great. That is a great point. In many organizations, you're seeing a lot of this, the busy world sort of making it more difficult for people to show up for various things. And I actually had an organization I was consulting with that said, like, this is such an issue. They had a very large board of directors, and it was over 50 on the board of directors, and they said, we don't understand, our board of directors, they're not showing up at our events, so they must not be engaged. We need to really make sure they show up, and they launched a massive campaign. At every meeting, you got hit over the head pretty much, 3 or 4 times. You've got to show up, you've got to show up, you've got to show up, we need to see you at this event, etc. And they really went full court with that, because to them they felt, man, if they're not coming to our events, then we're losing them. They're not engaged. And in working through that situation, what we found, and we did some focus groups, and we talked to a lot of those members, and it wasn't that they didn't want to be, it wasn't something they could do, and they'd much rather do something else, and that the something else actually ended up to take more time than having them there for a 1.5 or 2 hour event. They wanted to be involved in projects. They wanted to work with the team on one particular issue or program that they really cared about, and they were willing to put in 2 to 3 times more of their time on an ongoing basis to engage in that, because it was what they cared about, aligned with what they cared about, than showing up in an event. So I think that's such a great comment, that everyone's engagement shows itself in different ways, and there is not a master template to how it works. It's much more so about observing and learning and finding the personalities of each of your parents, and having the ability as a school to be able to engage them in different ways, so that there's not a set template for every parent, because it doesn't work for every parent.
Absolutely. And I think we also have to remember that sometimes Montessori leaders and teachers tend to fantasize that parents are more engaged than they are, whereas what they're really doing is they're dating you 1 month or 1 year at a time, and they're not quite sure whether that relationship's going to last beyond this year for a lot of reasons, one of which is tuition. Another is a desire to get their mother-in-law off their back about why they've got the kid in this weird, non-traditional school. A lot of it is just anxiety about, are they really making a terrible mistake? Does their child need a kick in the pants and a much more structured, traditional environment? A lot of people believe that. And so even though there always are true believers, the people who always show up on those rainy or snowy nights and they volunteer for everything, they often get burned out if you don't watch it. And they get discouraged because they feel like no one else cares. What, Liesl, you're describing is the idea of very consciously putting out a message that there is no one way to be a Montessori parent. There's lots of ways to be engaged and involved. There's lots of ways to learn. There's lots of ways to contribute. And you shouldn't feel guilty if one way that is popular with others doesn't work for you. But you need to keep looking at what are the various ways that your parents seem to enjoy, and create as many opportunities as you can without burning yourselves out as a school. And that's tricky too, by the way.
Yeah, what you're saying is it's very few things in life are templated and are a checklist, and if you go from A to B to Z, you will get to where you need to go. It's much more intuitive. And it is based really on observation and good communication. I think very much so. In the Montessori, in that Montessori perspective, is really based on observation. If you have a parent that has had a great conversation with a teacher about something that they were doing at home, where they brought some portion of the Montessori way of teaching into their home for an activity or for something to do with the kids on a weekly basis. Let's say they share that with the teacher. Well, the teacher's listening, number one, obviously, but then number two, they should be thinking, wow, that would make a great contribution or a great post to my blog. That is, and it depends on the topic and whether or not it's appropriate. But if it's appropriate, wow, then the teacher's reaching out and say, you know what, I'm so excited to hear that you utilize that and took that back into the home. You're doing these new activities with your kids. Would you mind writing, a little bit about it so we can include it in the classroom blog? Well, then all of a sudden you've got a parent who's just sharing information, and you've given them an ability to be even more engaged, and not only that, but to share it with the rest of the classroom. So the other parents who are in there saying, wow, there's this, there's a post here that's actually from one of the parents. It's not from the teacher, and it's not of the classroom, but it's something, a tip or something that they pulled together out of their relationship with Montessori. perspective and with the teacher that works for them at home. Ooh, what a great idea! And then it also makes them think about, well, I'm doing something like that too. Maybe I should bring it up to the teacher and share some of that. So you create this communal sort of database of stories and of sort of the of content that you can utilize your communications vehicles to share, and that becomes very authentic, and it comes across as very honest and true. And not only that, but there's your parent, actually being engaged and being recognized for that engagement through the communication vehicle.
That's a good point. Janice Outerbridge asked, what do you think of a lunch and learn? Obviously, the idea of having lunch together and doing some kind of a parent education or an open discussion or a Q&A.
Great. Those are great ideas. The lunch and learns and are really good. My suggestion would be that you provide a topic. And it may not be the only topic you cover. It may be a starting point for the conversation, but certainly having a topic lets all those busy parents know, okay, this is what we're going to be talking about, and actually that's something that really resonates with me. And those parents who might say, oh, I'm not really all that interested in that topic, well, then they can opt out rather than coming to the lunch and learn and having an expectation of what it would be and then walking out at the end going, oh my gosh, I could have been doing something else with the last hour if it didn't really align. I hear that all the time. So give us an idea of what the discussion is. Obviously, if there's more on the agenda that comes up organically, that's wonderful. But then I can figure out whether or not I can make that commitment and it's going to be valuable for me.
I think that the other thing is just to remember that there are all kinds of different things that schools do. Some people do breakfast, some people do lunches, some people do dinners, some people do the weekend journey, the famous Montessori journey that Barbara Gordon did. We're beginning to explore all kinds of strategies of the foundations for starting next year for all of the people that subscribe to Tomorrow's Child, because we noticed that a lot of schools, traditionally what really bonded parents to the school was the parenting education classes that the new parent would attend. And I'm not talking about how Montessori works. I'm talking about how to deal with your child at home, how to create that positive collaborative relationship. Quite often for a parent, if you can help them with that, they really form a level of relationship with you that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And not every school has a really good program for that. So we're exploring ways of either supporting schools in doing it locally more effectively and affordably. We're also looking for ways to create virtual communities along the lines of what Liesl is talking about. Certainly if you do parent ed, that's probably going to be one of your most effective things of all. I see Melissa has written something. She says, what about logging on? I've had difficulty engaging parents when they have to log on to a separate entity such as Montessori Compass or the parent portal on our website. There's no question that anything that doesn't reach out and touch you, it's easy to forget it's there. Melissa, it's very annoying. For that reason, some schools set their blogs or their online tools to notify parents that they've got a communication. Montessori Compass just does a once a day generic reminder that they have messages, and you're going to get parents that never remember to do it. My advice on that one is you gotta really train parents to pay attention to it. Other than that, you may find that blogs that have an email, what is it called, an RSS feed, something that tells you there's a new post or gives you a daily summary of all the posts, may be the most effective way to get people to remember that your blog or whatever other tool you're using is out there.
Yeah, it comes down to that push-pull. Is it push communication or is it pull communication? And With the blogs, I would really strongly encourage you to utilize a platform either within your website or to do a microsite sort of link that a blog scenario that allows you to do two things. One is to create subchannels. So if you have a singular blog for the school, but then you have a subchannel that is for each classroom, or you maybe have a parenting blog or a volunteer blog, to be able to set those channels so that every article you're posting, you can identify, I would like for it to go to these two channels, these three channels. It makes it a lot easier for a parent to engage in the channels that they want to. And the second thing is that many of the blog platforms now do automatic posting. So if your parents become followers for that particular blog or sub-channel, every time you post something to that channel, it's going straight to their email. And it's not a message that says there's something that's new on the blog, click here to come to it. It actually delivers the content right in the body of the email. So you're looking at the photo, you're looking at the article, it's right there in your email. And I would strongly suggest that. It cuts out some of the additional steps. There's no username and password they have to remember. It posts once they say, yes, I would like to be on this classroom blog, this parenting blog for the school, etc. Once they follow it, every time you post, they're going to get the content right in their email.
Looks like people aren't hearing me for some reason. I know I had to walk inside because my battery began to die. So again, it's been quite the day. I was sitting outside with the wind. Liesl, are you hearing me?
I am hearing you. You're cutting out a little bit, Tim, but I can hear you.
Okay. Well, hopefully the recording is going to be better. Let's see. We're running out of time. Let me just see if there's anything that's important. Susan Gaudio has said, we do coffee with the head of school and having a topic works best. The idea of those coffees, Susan, is an old one in the independent school community, and I'm sure it's been used in lots of other organizational work. It is a good strategy. They're typically just informal conversations. Sometimes they're held at school. I think it helps to remember that school is your turf, and parents tend to feel a little stiff when they're in a classroom setting, especially if they've got young kids and are sitting on itty bitty chairs that are uncomfortable for their rear ends. So quite often, if you can find a neutral turf for these kinds of things that's convenient to where people live, it's not always practical, but the more comfortable people are, the more you provide food and drinks, the more likely people are to want to come to them. Bottom line is the more people feel that the event is a positive experience, the more likely they are to come back, whether it's a live event or an online event. Susan goes on to add, we also did a Positive Discipline book club that was well received. Positive Discipline is a parenting education program developed by Jane Nelson. Jane Nelson is essentially a student of Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler is also the person that led to Rudolf Dreikurs Children the Challenge, Parent Effectiveness Training, Systematic Training for Effective Parenting, and the more commonly used in Montessori, Redirecting Children's Behavior. So whatever you can do to make sure you know Alfred Adler's theories about working with children and find a way to communicate it to parents, that really fits in nicely with Montessori. I think we're running out of time. I want to do a quick announcement or two before asking for final words from you and from Liesl. So if you have final words from you guys, start typing them in now. The first is next week, we will not have a webinar because I will be traveling to the American Montessori Society conference on Thursday morning. And to the best of my knowledge, I can't get Lorna, who's busily preparing for 2 on-site accreditation visits, to run the webinar for me, as she sometimes does. We will pick up again with the following week, and we'll keep going after that. I'll send out an email with the links to this recording and the last recording that we did. And just remind you all, I'm also going to ask everyone to give me more feedback about days and times of the webinar. We're trying to figure out whether or not this is a good time for most people. I know on the West Coast it is 7 in the morning when we start, and it's probably not your best time, but let's explore it, see what works for you folks. The other possibility is we may charge a small fee and begin to hold much smaller multi-person interactive conversations using an entirely different technology, and I'm gonna explore that and run it by you all and see if any of that seems like it makes sense. But in the meantime, we're planning to continue on this schedule for the rest of the year. We're trying to figure out what you all want to do next year. Lastly, I want to give you an update. One of the people who has presented now 2 or 3 times has been Barry Abrahams, the nationally known specialist in online advertising. Whatever Barry is doing seems to be working. I'm talking to all the schools, the Montessori schools that he's working with. They're all reporting incredible results, much more efficient advertising than they've ever seen before. And I did a little test at Newgate over the last 2.5 weeks. We go through high school, as you may know, and we were receiving relatively few applications for our children under the age of 6. I wanted to build that level of enrollment back up again. I asked him to make the change, and the phone within a matter of days began to ring off the hook. We're back up to 60 contacts a week, which in a school as small as Newgate, which is just 130 children, that's amazing. So wanted to let you know that if you are interested in learning more about Barry Abrahams, write to me and I'll give you his email address, or you can look him up at Barry Abrahams Online Marketing, or his company is called Brickway Marketing, or he has asked if we would begin to partner with him to collaborate as common consultants with Montessori schools that are trying to do this as part of an integrated upgrade in their overall public relations and engagement and marketing system. So we're beginning to prepare to launch that if any of you are interested. Lastly, Barry introduced me to somebody who is a website designer who is way beyond the norm and very, very affordable. I haven't seen this fellow's work yet myself. They're doing something at the moment just to show me what they can do. But Barry is raving about this guy, and so far everything Barry has told me has proven to be true. So again, be aware of it. If you're interested in learning more, I can put you in touch with Barry, who in turn can let you know how to reach this fellow who's doing such beautiful work with website design. He's interested in specializing in Montessori schools, which is unusual. And Liesl, you have become such an incredible asset. I hope you'll agree to come back and do a third session with us. You think we could?
Absolutely, Tim.
Good.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure.
Well, I'll talk with you about your schedule and we'll see what works during the next couple of months. In the meantime, is there anyone that wants to make any last words? This is your big opportunity while you're still online. Any comments, questions? Nancy says, thank you, Liesl. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Nancy.
Last couple of moments before we sign off. Not seeing anything else come in. Mary says, thank you, very helpful. More Liesl. We want more Liesl. And I am so sorry, everybody, for the technical problems we had this week. After I get off, I'm going to go into the computer room here at Newgate and figure out why the internet is giving us trouble. This is the beauty of a wireless campus. From one end to the other, it's all supposed to be seamlessly connected, and it decided not to work correctly today. Thomas says, very helpful. The free webinar is extremely helpful for those who are on a limited budget. If you begin charging, I would suggest a certificate for attendance to be given with state required hours for Texas. That certainly makes sense, Toma. If we do decide to charge, it would be because we make it much more formal and we really do more to it, and we certainly can offer CEUs. But for these things right now, we're not doing any testing or anything else, so it's just sort of a free benefit. But I'm very pleased with it. I want to remind everyone we're working right now, a whole team of us, on the development of a new master's degree in Montessori school leadership and a Montessori school leadership certification program similar to Montessori teacher training. That'll be launching sometime next year in early 2016, and we certainly hope that we'll see you. So there we go. I think that's it for this week. Liesl, any last words from you? Liesl? No, I think we may have lost the meeting. So this is Tim Selden saying good day and talk to you next week.